Hello everyone. Deborah Morgan with Kids Health Revolution, coming to you today live to chat a little bit about one of my favorite resources that I like to turn to when we're going through this process of helping our kids heal from toxicity and perhaps mold exposure and mold toxicity. So even if you're working with a functional medicine doctor or a naturopath or homeopath or somebody who's professionally trained to help you out on this journey, helping you with toxicity and mold and all of these different pieces of the puzzle, I think that it's still really important that we stay informed and have a good understanding ourselves just as parents. So that doesn't mean you're necessarily going to go about changing everything that you're doing in terms of protocols, but I find that I really like to understand why the doctors are doing something. So why are we taking these binders and how does it work? What does mold do to my child's body? Why is this such a serious thing that I need to understand and take seriously? So I find that I like to read a lot. So I attend webinars and I read as much as I can, and I want to share with you guys some of the resources that I come across that I find most helpful in this journey. Hi Sonia, nice to see you. So this is the one that I have been reading lately. It's called Toxic. Now I think for some reason Facebook Live does this weird thing where it puts everything backwards. So I'm going to read it to you. So it's Toxic. It's called Heal Your Body from Mold, Toxicity, Lyme Disease, Multiple Chemical Sensitivities, and Chronic Environmental Illness. So you may not be sure that you've had any mold issues in your home or school or work environment or anything like that. But it's still a really interesting read as something to be aware of. Mold toxicity can also come from our food. So if your child's eating a diet in foods that are high in aflatoxins, so peanuts, regular chocolate, nuts, dried fruit, coffee, kids probably aren't having too much of that, but lots of these different foods, grains especially, can be very high in molds. So we can be having mold exposure in that way as well. And sometimes once those molds get into the body, whether they're ingested and we eat them or we breathe them in from the environment, some of them can start to colonize to a certain degree in the nasal cavity as well as the digestive tract. So we need to take some steps to help the body get rid of these toxins. So this book is a really good resource. It's written for the layperson as well as for a doctor. So it's got some technical bits in there that are sometimes maybe a little bit dry, but really interesting. And I really like his sort of summary or introduction to the idea of mold and mold illness and how that can present in our children, and how sometimes it can present itself as something else. So oftentimes when our kiddos have conditions that are just sneaking under the radar for any other type of diagnosis, hi Stephanie, mold can be something we look at because it's very stealthy and it's not highly recognized. So reading something like this where it gives you a good introduction into it is a great way to understand it yourself so that then you can advocate for your child. So this book goes through, really well, talks about what is mold toxicity. It has a really neat little page here with some common symptoms that are associated with mold toxicity and how those can be confused with other conditions. He also talks about how mold and mycotoxins, it's often a multi-layered issue. So for example, my son, we've been treating for Lyme co-infections and pandas and pans, as many of you know. And so it's not just about the infections. There's multiple things often going on in the body or the child's body when there's illnesses like this, because it can cope with a certain number of infections, deal with these, viruses and bacteria that get in there. But when we start piling insult on top of insult on top of insult, that's when the body starts to manifest disease. And mold is often one of those insults that we don't realize is there. And that happened to us. We didn't realize we had mold in our house until my son developed PANS. And then we found all the infections, but we also thought, well, let's have a look at what's going on in our house. We had an inspection done, we did the dust test, and we found out, yeah, well, this is a big problem. And interestingly, when we tested the dust in our house, and then we did a urine test, and this book talks all about how to test and how to test properly. The molds that we found in our house were the same as the species that we were finding in his body, in his urine. So we knew his body was being burdened and being taxed by these toxins. So then it's about going about treating it. So in here, he does talk about, he outlines the different steps and things that need to be done if you're dealing with mold toxicity in the body. As I said, he talks about testing. He goes through different detoxification strategies. He talks about different binders. So binders are used to pull toxins out of the body. We're probably familiar with hearing that in terms of heavy metal detoxification or environmental detoxification. We can do that with mold as well, but there's specific types of binders that work better for different types of mold species, just like different binders work better for different types of heavy metals. So he goes through the different types of binders that you can use depending on what you're struggling with. And then he just goes through, he has a really good introduction into Bartonella, Babesia, and some of the infections that are associated with Lyme disease. He differentiates between toxicity and sensitivity, which is kind of cool. There's not a lot of other doctors that are talking about that. It's kind of, gets a bit gray and a bit fuzzy, but it's interesting how he talks about people who are have a lot of sensitivities will react very negatively to detox because they're just too sensitive. So that's a really good indication that we need to work on toxicity first and then go after sensitivities and food sensitivities and things like this. So, and then he goes through some interesting chapters on rebooting. So he talks about rebooting the immune system, the endocrine system, the nervous system, and he has some really interesting stuff in here on some alternative therapies, like polyvagal nerve therapy. He recommends osteopathic and craniosacral for nervous system, neurofeedback, specific microcurrent frequency, lots of really neat stuff. What was one of the other ones that I saw in here that I thought was so cool that he was recommending it? Acupuncture, he recommends that. Dynamic neural retraining system, which I thought was really interesting. And there's a website called retrainingthebrain.com, and it's called, this guy has a book called Wired for Healing, and it's about working with the limbic system and leftovers from primal reflexes, something that I'm definitely going to pursue with my son. So he's got a lot of really interesting ideas in here in terms of other therapies. He talks about using ozone, GCMAF. He talks about using omega-6 fatty acids, and this is a very interesting one because if you're just looking at, your regular, if you go into a website and you're looking at nutrition, most of the time what we see is that we need to be giving our kids and we need to be giving ourselves more omega-3 fatty acids because our diet tends to be higher in omega-6 fatty acids. But this is where nutrition is always bio-individual, because if you have mold toxicity or some of these other environmental toxicities, what can happen when we test is we might find out, which was the case with my son, and I was fascinated with this because we have such a clean diet, is he's very low in his omega-6 fatty acids, too high in omega-3 fatty acids. And that can be a problem in terms of the stability of the cell lining. They can get a little too floppy. And this happens specifically because of the toxicity. So we can be throwing in too much omega-3 thinking we're doing a fabulous thing, and in fact it's the opposite of what we should be doing when there's this toxicity level. So we've begun supplementing with phosphatidylcholine, quite high doses of that, as well as hemp seed oil, which is higher in omega-6 than omega-3. And he had us on some primrose oil and a few other things to try and bring that omega-6 up and bring that balance back. So if you do have a child that has a complex health issue, remember that everybody's individual, and just the sort of standard, everybody should drink celery juice kind of information isn't always the best advice. So that's why I really like this book. I find it to be an interesting resource and read, and that's because I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to this stuff. But if you are on the path as a warrior mom, as a revolutionary mom, then I think this could be a really good addition to your library as well. The name of the author is Neil Nathan. He's an MD, and he works with some really tough cases and some really cool and encouraging success stories in the book as well. So that's a resource that I would recommend to you if you think that there's any level of toxicity, if you've been thinking about mold as an issue, and pretty much everybody should consider it, especially if you've been doing healing for some time and you're not getting further movement forward. It's always something to look into. So that's my recommendation for today, guys. If you have any questions about it, Sonia says craniosacral, we do that in our family. That's awesome. I love cranio. It's the most relaxing thing. My kiddo, not so much. He has a hard time. He likes it for like 20 minutes and he's like, okay, are we done? He's happy to be on his way and go about playing, but it can be really, really wonderful stuff. So yes, awesome, you guys. So any further questions, please post them below, or comments, things that you'd like to share with me. I'm happy to scroll through and answer whenever I can, and I will be back with you next week. Oh, actually, no, that's a lie. I probably won't be back next week. I think we're going to visit my mom in Victoria for a little while next week. Nice little family getaway. We're driving out there. So we'll be on a little hold, and then I'll be back with you the following week with another video. I think we'll be doing another nice recipe that you can use for summertime with your kids. Take care, guys. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.